told me, listen when you told me. Look at how I'm on it, look at how I'm on it. I am not a DJ, this is not a replay.
Welcome to MixCon. How are you guys doing? All right. I want to welcome up to the stage Sonic Scoop co-founder David Weiss. David Weiss, come on up and take over. This guy.
Thanks, Justin. How you like the way he and I passed the mic, right? Well, here's a scoop, is that me and Justin are putting out a rap album next week. I told Justin that I really wanted to do this introduction because I've known Ariel Borujow for a long time. Every time I see him present, there's really no one like him in audio. He just tells it like it is. He doesn't mess around. And when you're done, you have become enlightened. We really want to thank iZotope for making Ariel's talk possible. He's going to be talking about pop, R&B. His most recent project is with Keys N Krates featuring Tory Lane. And we're bringing him up in 2, 3, 1, 0. Come up. Thank you.
All right. How's everyone doing? All right. So first of all, I want to thank iZotope, Sonic Scoop, and the Deli for having me back. I did the first one in 2000, I think it was 2015. So I'm honored to be back here. They asked me to come back, so it's definitely an honor. So before I start mixing, talking about the mix, I kind of want to get into the mindset of how I approach working with a client, because I think that's really important. It's something that that's not talked about a lot. And lately, I think it's been maybe the last 2 or 3 years, I've been mixing more full projects, which is awesome. You know, for a while it was like a lot of singles and one-offs. So there's an approach that you have to have that is overlooked, and it's the initial conversation with the client, right? I always say that before you start a mix, the most important thing as a mixer is to get into the mindset of the artist or the producer. And that's something that sets the tone for the entire project. So this project was, I did for Keys N Krates. I think it was 10 songs altogether. It's a really great project if you guys haven't heard it. It's an album called Cura. The record I'm going to break down today is featuring Tory Lanez. I chose this record, and forgive me because I opened it up this week for the first time in a few months, but the single is going to hit radio this month or next month. I can't remember. The video just came out. So I chose this one for that reason. But there's also 070 Shake is on there, and a few other artists, so it's been really fun. So I spent probably a few days talking with one of the main guys, Adam Tunes, for a few days on the project, just to get an idea. This was their first full-length project. They've done a lot of singles, but this was a project that was done for Dim Mak, which is Steve Aoki's label. I know it says pop R&B. It is R&B. It's pop. I mean, it's popular, so I guess we'll say, but it does have electronic elements in there as well. So I spent some time really getting to the mindset. There was some back and forth going on. The great thing about working with these guys were, I won't tell you how old I am, but we're sort of the same age, which they specifically asked me to bring back the warmth into records, and not only to bring the warmth back into the records, but also to make it current, which I had to figure that one out. I guess it was more about keeping it nice and bright, but without being overbearing as well, but making it really warm. Some of you that know my work, I've been in the box now since, does anyone not know what being in the box is? Raise your hand. Good. Oh. Okay, so being in the box is I don't use analog equipment. I'm completely, what you see is what you get. I'm completely inside the computer. I come from the analog world. I started off with, I used to love mixing on SSLs. When I worked for Puffy, we had an SSL and a Neve. I tend to lean towards the SSL sound. Although if I track, I like the old Neves, which are really awesome. So being in the box is, to me, I don't know, some people think that it's there's a sound quality degradation. I don't believe so. I always say it's the ear, not the gear, that does it. It takes time. I pretty much obsess over mixes. What's really nice about it is I have my own private room, which I can mix, and then I can also go away with my family and I can keep mixing. I use a product called Sonar Works. I don't know if you guys, I think they're around, but I love their product because they pretty much have like a headphone correction and a room correction, and if you use them both, you can kind of get, I guess, close to the room and the headphone as you can, and jumping between the two makes it real seamless. So I'm definitely obsessive with my work, and working on an album being in the box makes it a lot easier, because I don't know how many of you have ADD or anything like that, but sometimes I can't focus on one song and I like to jump around, especially if I'm not feeling it, if I spend too much time, if I find myself spending too much time on a kick drum or a vocal or whatever, I can just move around and I don't have to recall any gear or any of that. That's not saying that analog is not great or just as good. They're both amazing. This is just my way of working, and the fact that you can make anything sound the way that you want in the box enticed me to jump in the box. So anyway, I'm going to play the record, and we'll start, and then I'll give you guys a little, I guess, an idea of where my mindset was with this. So I have the album version, the top of that, and I'm just going to start with the radio version because it gets right into it.
Listen when you talk, babe. Listen when you talk, babe. Look at how I'm on it. Look at how I'm on it. I am not a DJ. This is not a replay. She gon' let me plug in and hit it to the preset. Music to my, yeah, yeah, yeah. Music to my, yeah, yeah, yeah. Music to my ear, yeah, yeah, yeah. When we love and we touch and we kissing and I want you right here. Music to my ears. It's music to my ears, baby. It's music to my ears, baby. It's music to my ears, baby. Whoa, yeah. Listen when I play this. This is not a playlist. We've been on the same shit. I ain't tryna change shit. Got girls that be tryna get famous, but they remain nameless. Shawty got me on a waiting list. Damn right, I'm awaiting this. Music to my, yeah, yeah, yeah. Music to my, yeah, yeah, yeah. Music to my ear, yeah, yeah, yeah. When we love and we touch and we kissing and I want you right here. Music to my, yeah, yeah, yeah. Music to my, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I got a pretty interesting way of working and my own theory on it. First thing is, there's no right or wrong way of mixing. It's really just about finding your own way, which takes time. I think I just started really understanding my own style probably in the last 2 years. And I've been doing this for a long time. I started when I was 18, and I started really digging into mixing when I was about 19. And you're always second guessing yourself. You know, you never know when to stop or whatnot. So I think in the last 2 years, I sort of figured out my own way of working. And being from New York, we like the drums and we like the low end, and I think that's what makes us the best. I don't care what anyone says. So I'm not going to tell you that I sit there and obsess about the kick drum and try to get that knocking, but I always start with the drums, the bass, and the minute I'm done with that, I pop the vocal in. Now, what's interesting about this particular mix is that this was the first time that the Keys N Krates fellows worked with Tory Lanez, so getting his vocal dry was not an option. And I'm finding that to be the case for a lot of my clients these days, where they ask me if they could send me a wet vocal and a dry vocal. I'm not one of these engineers that says I could make it sound better than them, because there's a certain spark that you have inside when they send you something that they've been obsessing over. A lot of the time it's really good. Sometimes it's just makes more sense to enhance that, and they'll find that a lot more appealing than if you just start from scratch. Now, there's times that there's distortion and overcompression, but that's part of the communication with the artist. So I got the vocal, and the vocal doesn't sound that much different than what I did to it. All I did was enhance a little bit. So I'm going to start with just the drums and the bass, and then we're going to put the vocal in, and you'll hear what I'm talking about. Now, the other thing is, as you guys see, here's my master chain, right? And I'm sure I'll have a question where someone's going to be like, why do you have a master fader, a print bus, and a monitor? The reason is because I don't know today. I usually have all my plugins on the print bus, and I had it on the monitor. There was a reason at some point, I don't know why, when you're working on a project, it doesn't make any difference. Usually on the monitor, I usually put a limiter, and then I have my Sonar Works. And the reason I have it was because when I send it to mastering or I print, the Sonar Works, you have to disengage that. If not, whatever curve that you have that you pinged your room out with is going to be printed, which I've done before with a client. And they're like, dude, your mix sounds awful. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm listening to it. And it was because of that. So I do use a lot of heavy bus processing, not compression, as you'll see. The main plugins I always use is the SSL G-Bus compressor, which I love. I'm definitely going to try to demo that Brainworks one for sure. The Brainworks, this I use more for stereo widening. I'll do a little bump on the high end, on the low end, whatever I need. Not too much, but I love the widening on here, and I love the mid-side capabilities of it. Every once in a while, you'll find the curve bender, and this is always on. I actually have my own preset that I created, the Ariel 2 bus. I don't care what genre of music it is. It's something that I tweaked from the beginning, and I use it on every single mix from the beginning. And then after that, which was new, was when Isotope, I've been using Ozone for, God, I think it was might be since version 4. When they sent me Ozone 8, that was a kind of a game changer for me because of the master assistant. It's basically like an AI. And what's really dope about it is it gets you to a ballpark of what it thinks your mix needs. I'm not going to let a computer tell me what it needs, but it came close enough that I ended up tweaking it and, adding my own thing to it. I added an exciter to it, which you can see up here. What I use the exciter for is I use it in mid-side mode, which is really cool. I do a lot of mid-side processing, but from the beginning, this is my mix always starts. And the Waves NLS, it just sounded good on this mix, so I just went with it. I don't always use it. But the big thing that I use is the heat over here that is part of the Pro Tools. I start with that right from the beginning. If you hear the drop and I take out the heat, you're going to hear a huge difference. You hear that, right? So I use that all the time. I literally, my mix starts always with this setup. These two plugins, always, from the beginning. And that's pretty much how I'm mixing the drums and the bass into it, right from the beginning. So let's go to, I'm gonna mute, and I have a pretty comprehensive setup that my assistant Matt has a template that pretty much he sets everything up and has everything. You know, I have a vocal bus, so in case I need to mute the vocals, all the vocals, I can mute it right here. There's effects that I use that pretty much I have effects for anything to the right side of the master is always my vocals, and then to the left is instrumental drums, everything on that side. But I always put different, if you look, I pretty much have the effects for the vocals going out, the all vocal bus, which is right here, and then the instrumental, the same thing there. So pretty much, if I mute one thing, I can print my instrumental, I can print my acapella, whatever. So it's just easy. Especially when you're working so much, you don't want to have to think about it. And it's always the same thing. So pretty much the mix started off like this. And just so you guys know, I always have a reference in there. So this was their reference. This is them. And let me open up. And that's me. And they spent so much time, literally, I remember them saying, like, man, I hope you could really make it sound better than that, you know? And I think I did. So here's the drums and the bass. And this is how we started. Let me just have the group set up. And I'll go over my drum processing as well. I do a lot of bus processing. It's just what I'm used to doing. And of course, I'm still on their mix, right? Yep. So the bass, I pretty much have on the main bass, is I have the slate, I'm just using this, and I'm adding the decapitator. You take those away. Let me mute this parallel because I do a lot of parallel processing as well. So this is just this. If I take this out, you can hear that's without anything. Just adds a little bit of love in there. And then I'm using the parallel. A lot of the times the way people are listening to things is off the computer, and that's the one way that I changed my mixing style is I reference a ton on computer speakers, and I also reference quite a bit. I have like a little a Bose SoundLink, like the little one, literally sits right next to me, and I have an output going to that so I can always listen on that. And a lot of the time I'm listening in mono as well. People think that in mono you're just hearing phasing, which you do. But what's really cool is when you listen in mono and you really pay attention, you can hear frequencies rubbing up against each other. And if you can make it sound clear in mono, at least my opinion, it's going to sound really awesome in stereo, right? So this is without the parallel, and here's with. You hear that little bit of crunch in there? Now by itself, it kind of sounds like shit, I think. Like it almost sounds like a distorted bass that shouldn't be there. But when you listen to it in the context of the song, you can start feeling the bass quite a bit, right? So I started with that. I have nothing. Sometimes I add on the bass bus, I sometimes add like another saturation. I'm really heavy on saturation, right? And I'm always working like into the master bus, and I'm tweaking the master bus and the individuals as I'm moving along. Keeps it interesting. So that's the bass, right? So let's get the bass, and then I'll add the drums. The drums, there was quite a bit going on. With the kick, and I have a parallel drum bus. I also have, and so basically I have the drum bus with the parallel. As you guys can see, I have some sends. Some of them don't sound right, so I don't have them up. I always just add them in there from the beginning, and then I just slowly add whatever's needed into that parallel chain. So I have the drum bus. On the drum bus, I have the vertigo. I'm hitting it around 4-1, I think. Something like that. And right from the beginning, I'm adding my compressor to it because I don't want any surprises later, because you think it sounds great and then you add a compressor and then you start working backwards. So I pretty much in my head, the minute I listen to the song, I already know where I'm going to go with it, right? So, and then after that, I have the slate. That's without the slate. This is without this. It's a little flat to me, right? So this is the kick. All I have on here. I don't even know what I'm taking out some highs, and that's pretty much it on this kick drum. But I have the parallel. I did have a parallel kick. Oh yeah, there it is. So the parallel kick I have next to it, and this is just pretty much for low end. As you can see, I'm taking everything from 10K and above off. I'm adding 60 hertz. I'm doing a really wide bandwidth on it. I'm taking out more, and then I'm adding the 160. The 160 is really dope because it adds like, it makes it a little bit more snappy, and it helps cut through the speakers a little bit. So without the parallel, with the parallel. Can you hear a difference out there? I can't tell. It just sounds like mud out here. Does it sound different? Okay, cool. That's good. So then I added the snare in there. The snare, let's hear it flat real quick. That was the snare flat. But you got to remember something, right? Even if I take all those off, I have all of this processing that's still going on, right? And then also the heat makes a difference, and also whatever I have going on the master makes a huge difference. So you got to remember that everything's working well together. So I'm always thinking about the heat. Sometimes I end up backing up off the heat. There's times that I'll do 2 passes when I send to my mastering guy where I'm like, hey man, I'm going to send you one with one way of heat, and then I might even add more or less, and he'll choose whichever one he thinks sounds better. I'm kind of spoiled because we've been working together for a long time, and I like to put him to work. That's the obsession. And then, so the snare pretty much, I think of, I like the old hip-hop records. I like, one of my biggest influences was Bob Powers, who did all the Tribe records. And, even to this day, when you listen to those Tribe records, there's a certain sound that when the snare hits, that it just has this impact that you can feel it in your chest. And every time any New York mixer that, has come up in the ranks knows Bob Powers was the best when it came to that. There was a certain way that he had the snare sitting and the vocal just sitting right above it, and you can feel both. And the doubler, I'm using where is my doubler? The doubler is just the Waves one. I took out the middle here, just the sides. Nothing crazy. It might actually be the stock. except that I just pushed out the sides to widen them up. I don't think the stock, I think the stock comes in something like this or something, I don't know. Just to widen it up, give it a little bit more impact. That's like a little trick that I do. Then there's a reverb, which I don't think comes in till later. Right? So then we add the bass in there. And no joke, right away, I start mixing the vocal. So I go right for the vocal. And this is what it sounded like. And the reason I put the vocal in right away is a very simple answer. The song's about the vocal, like it's Tory Lanez, and he's the featured artist, right? So what I learned from trial and error is that if you start mixing your music early on and you try to add the vocal in later, from my experience, you start working backwards, right? Because all of a sudden your vocal, you start taking out some low end, you start taking out 250, 300, and all of a sudden your vocal sits well, but it doesn't have that impact. So what my thought process is let's get the drums and bass knocking, and then let's put the vocal in right away so we don't lose the frequencies that the vocal deserves, right? So it deserves some 300 in there and whatever. And the way that the vocal was given to me, I have to respect the artist. The last thing I want to do is mess up the relationship between Tory and the fellows of Keys N Krates, because this is their first time working together. So there's a bit of pressure to make sure that it sounds great. So I wanted to retain Tory's sound because they spent time, and part of the agreement was this is how Tory wants it to sound. That's it, right? So I put it in, and this is how I work on any genre that has vocals in it, right? All the time. So we have the vocal in, right? I think it's going to be easier if I just mute everything else because I have the synth bus, I have the effects. The sample is a sample replay, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Sounds great, right? So all of a sudden, right away, and it's a very simple mix. It looks simple, but it actually took me a little bit longer than most. We have the sample, right? And the sample in the chorus, this was there. So both of these are played, but what Adam did was he sent me two different versions of the replay of the sample and said, whichever one you decide. I actually decided to use both. There was a certain depth in both of them that when you had both of them together, they just sounded so dope together that I just went with it. There's really no rules, right? So I just kept it. So this is what it sounded like. I'm going to take out the processing and just use one right now. So I have on this one, I have the radiator, which I'm boosting quite a bit of bass. I have an EQ, just a standard Pro Tools EQ, which I'm taking out some of those harsh frequencies. And then I'm using Neutron on this. And on Neutron, I have an EQ, I have the compressor, and I'm using the exciter. I think the AI, I did use it on this, which is so dope. And of course, I kept tweaking it, but I think that when I got the AI, I believe that it was just the high band, and it was cranked. What I do a lot, and I've been using, the Neutron pretty much replaced, you guys remember Alloy 2? So it replaced that, and one of the things I loved was the exciter. I thought the exciter was a game changer for me because of the multiband saturation. What I do is I usually, when I start using it, I drive it all the way, and I find where it goes to its breaking point. And then what I do is I take the blend, which is the wet dry, and I turn it from 100 down to 0. And then I start doing parallel, and I sneak it in until I feel like it sounds right, and then I kind of play with the drive a little bit. But you'll never see, it's rare that you see the blend at 100. I just like to do a lot of parallel processing. The other cool thing that I didn't use on this one, if you guys, can you see over here, it says width, you can actually widen it as well. But of course, you got to be careful because you're listening in mono a lot, at least I am. For about 50 to 60% of the mix, I'm listening in mono. And this is what it sounded like without anything. And why isn't it playing? Because I have something muted, and I don't know what it is. Hold on a second. That's weird.
When we love and we touch and we kissing and I want you right.
Because it's going out the synth bus. That's my fault. That's why, because there was I'll explain it after, but it's going out the synth bus as well. There was a reason because I was trying a few things with the synths. One of the things that Adam wrote in here, there's a bridge in here that he kind of wanted the synths and the strings to kind of blend well together with the sample. So I put them in the same thing in case I would have had to overall add some EQ or compression or whatnot. So this is what it sounded like before. Adds a little bit more weight to it, right? And then if you hear this one, it's got a different... That's without anything. And on this one, I'm using the A800 here. And one of my favorite plugins I've been using since this thing came out is the Trash 2, which is insane. Anyone who's worked with me knows this. Another multiband saturation. And it's really dope because you can actually mess with the curves on it and really tweak it to your desire. It's rare that I use anything else on this. Sometimes I might use the filter post just to get rid of some frequencies. But most of the time I'm using trash for just this one part, which is the trash. So when you hear both of them together, if I mute this, it just adds a little bit of weight. So if I have this, and one of the things I always do on almost every mix to make it exciting is if you look on my master, which is the monitor, and this is post all my plugins, I always turn up the chorus or the drop about, I mean, it depends. I've gone a little crazy before, but anywhere between half a dB to a dB and a half. If you can hear it, it's too much. If you can feel it, it's perfect. So it just gives it like a little bit more excitement to the mix. So I'm doing that on this mix. Sometimes I might go as far as like if there's like 3 choruses and there's a little bit more going on in the final chorus, I may turn up a little bit more, like I may go up a little bit more on the last chorus just to give it a little bit more excitement, right? Everyone with me so far? No one's falling asleep out there, right? Because I'll start dancing. Okay, so let's see. Where are we at now? The vocal. Let's talk about Tori's vocal, okay? Then, I mean, all this other stuff is like, you have the effects, which is the whooshes and everything. There's times that I'll just have the client, they spend so much time like with the automating all this stuff and making sure that on certain parts it hits right. So I'll tell them to either send it to me separated or I'll just have them send me a stereo track, and then I'll pick. And then sometimes just what's there on the stereo may work. In this case, I'm turning, the effects noise down a little bit. I have the vocal chops down a little bit, for whatever reason. So I did the multi-track of this one. And then sometimes I will do some parallel on the entire instrumental. I've gone as far as doing parallel on the entire mix at times, which is a cool effect. I don't do it that often. I always try to challenge myself, and I try new things every month. That's what I love about plugins, because they're just so good right now that you can, the sky's the limit with these things. So Tori's vocal, you're going to hear a slight difference. You're not going to hear much of a difference. But on his vocal, I have, we'll start with the verse. So I have the Studer A800, which I'm jamming pretty hard here. The one thing I did change on here is I took the noise off because I don't like that noise on these plugins. And I have the Ozone 8, and on the Ozone 8, I have the vintage tape, and again, I'm adding more saturation. And think about how much saturation I'm already doing. I have it on the master, I'm using heat, I'm doing it on the individual, then I have the vintage compressor, then I have the dynamic EQ, and I'm doing the exciter at mid-side because the reason I did it on mid-side on the vocal is because they printed it with effects. So what that allowed me to do was to kind of push the effects a little bit further out in the stereo field, if that makes any sense. So and of course, I'm still listening in mono to make sure that I'm not losing that. So this is what it sounded like dry, which is not really dry.
Listen when you talk, babe.
And I'll solo.
Listen when you talk, babe. Look at how I'm on it. Look at how.
And let's be fair about this, just so we see how much work got put into it. I'm going to bypass heat. I'm going to bypass all the effects, and this is his vocal.
Listen when you talk, babe. Listen when you talk, babe.
Now, I'll even be more fair about it, right? When I bring it back in, I'll take the maximizer off. And I always have the maximizer when I send it to the client, because I am so tired of people like sending me emails and being like, hey man, it's not as loud as the record on Spotify. I'm done explaining to people what mastering is. It's over. I have other things to waste my time with. So I'm going to take this off, and we're going to put all the plugins back in. I'll start with heat.
Listen when you talk, babe. Look at how I'm on it.
Master stuff.
Look at how I'm on it. I am not
Big
a
difference,
DJ.
right? As soon as I
This is
take
not
this
a
off.
replay. Sure gon' let me plug in. And hit it to
Now,
the preset.
let's do the individual.
Listen when you talk, babe. Listen when you talk, babe.
You hear how it's clear, there's a little bit of bump, and especially what really took it over the edge was the Ozone 8, the exciter. I'm going to...
Listen when you talk, babe. Listen when you talk, babe.
I don't know how well you can hear stereo out there, but...
Look at how I'm on it.
And then I'll add this.
I am not a DJ. This is not a replay.
And I'm adding, if you look, the sides, I'm doing a little bit. Again, this is the parallel that I always do, right? And I'm changing, between tape, triode. Sometimes I use the warmth setting. And if you go to the mid, which is really where the bulk of Tori's vocal is, look how much of the analog I'm adding in here. So if I...
Listen when you talk, babe. Listen when you talk, babe. Look at how I'm on it. Look at how I'm on it.
So it's adding a little bit more body, and I'm trying not to go overboard because this is what they wanted. This is what Tori, you have to respect the artist and you got to respect the producer. Your job as a mixer is to facilitate. I mean, my career has finally changed where people are asking me for an opinion. Anyone that has Pro Tools or whatever you use could make things sound good. You really could. You could obsess for a week on a song, and you should be able to make it sound good. But the difference is what I'm bringing to the table now is I'm giving it a certain feel that it's lacking, that they need that extra ear. So I want to make sure I keep the feel where it is, but I'm also enhancing it and bringing something to the table. So without going overboard. Because the minute I tried to do something, and I thought it sounded great. I mean, he has a competent engineer. They did some really nice compression. I didn't have to do too much to it, right?
Listen when you talk, babe. Listen when you talk, babe.
And the bass here, I'm not doing anything, but I'm adding the Dimension D, which is something I almost 80% of the time do on bass. It's the same setting. It's the 2 and 4 setting. If somebody asked me why I use that setting, when I was an assistant years ago, and a long time ago, I I remember this producer always used the same setting, and I just got used to it. I've tried other settings, but it does sound cool. It's a little bit wider. I mean, I think on this one, and I'm not going to do it now, but I think you could press all the buttons in. It's really cool. So I always do that, and what it does, it's the chorusing effect, and it also pushes it out into the speakers a little bit more. So if I bypass that, you can hear what it sounds like. This is without it. And if I push it up, you can hear it. And I mean, it's just adding a little bit more dimension to the bass, especially the fact that it's the bass and the vocal is really what the heart of the intro is, right? What else? Okay, so in the chorus here, at the end, I believe, I automated here the effect rack, and I'm doing something on here. I'm doing a lot of shit on here. Okay, so let's look at it here. And it's, if you look, it's the entire focus on this is going to be the wet dry on here. I basically got my sound fully wet, and I pretty much dumbed it down at the end just because I just wanted a little bit. I didn't want to kill what's already there. So if you look, I mean, this is what it, that's what it was. I think it was somewhere there. Just to kind of change it, this is what it was like without it. You hear that? So if I bring it back in, that's me just getting crafty and trying some cool things. That's the stuff that I get obsessed, you know? And that probably came later in the mix because what I've learned to do in the last few years is, you know, in the beginning, and I've said this in other events I've spoken at, is that when you first start mixing, you're learning what to do, and then later on, the older you get, you're learning what not to do. So if you look at the mix in general, it's really not that complicated. So what I've learned to do is to move quick in the beginning. I can pretty much have a full mix-up depending on how well the production is. Let's make sure that everyone understands this. Because what I learn happens in a lot of songs is that some of the production I get is not that great. And what you're doing is you're adding, like, you may layer another kick in there, you may layer a snare, you're adding things in there, and then all of a sudden when they hear the mix back, it becomes, instead of making like mix changes, now all of a sudden the producer has ideas and they want to add something. Let's try this here and all of that, and it becomes a different song. This mix in general, it was easy because the guys are really good producers. And one of the guys in the group, Adam, is actually an engineer. So he called me out a couple times on things. He's really good. So what I did was I started off with faders and I move, and I do this a lot more on mixes now where I'm just moving fast. And what that helps you, what that does for you is you're able to put your feeling into the record first. So you're just putting in the emotion into the record, and you're moving fast, and you start getting to know the record too, because all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, this is here, and you're flipping back and forth between the rough mix and that, and it makes you move quick. Within 2 hours, I 2 to 3 hours, let's say, depending on the size of the record, I pretty much have a mix done. And then after that, I'm doing little things like this where I'm, you know, adding these effects and all of that, right? So it's important that if you walk away with something today, at least from my presentation, is to, I guess, think less about the mixes and put more emotion into it. Because everyone knows when you hear a record that feels good, you pretty much know that it feels good. Like, you can hear it. Like, even like Kanye stuff now, like, I'm not crazy about the new mixes on his project, but there's a certain feeling in there that if the mixes were done better, I don't know if it would have that same feeling. I don't know if I would feel the same way. So I'm learning to add more of the feeling into it, and that makes you move a lot quicker on mixes. And the older I get, and when I listen to other engineers who are older than me speak about that, I never understood what they meant until the last few years. So it's really important that you think like that. Because when I see someone send me a session and like every plug-in space is taken up, it drives me crazy. I'm like, what are you doing? And then they'll add an EQ, and then they add another EQ to undo what the other EQ did. And it's just like, why not just take the other EQ and fix that one first, you know? It's one thing if you add an EQ and like certain things like a Pultec might have a sound and you add that and add a little bit of low end, and that makes sense. But when I see like drastic cuts and boosts and then I see another EQ doing exactly the same thing, I'm like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, it's crazy. So I try to keep it simple. The one thing that really I do want to focus on a little bit on the master is the Ozone, because since Ozone 8 came out, I've been using it quite a bit on a lot of my mixes, and you can hear, and I know someone's going to ask me, because usually the last thing in my chain is the ATR, right? But what I'm doing with the ATR now is the Ozone comes in and I use the AI, I use the Master Assistant. And usually when you hit Master Assistant, this comes up. And you can hit the streaming and all of that. And what that does is when you hit streaming, it'll give you the LUFS level that it feels like for YouTube or whatever. I use the CD quality and I always go to medium. And the reason I do that is because I can control the output afterwards. And I'm not mastering it. I'm just sending it to them. So I want to make sure that they get the nicest, brightest representation, clearest of my work. I don't want to dumb it down to streaming right away. Plus, if they like listen to my record compared to something streaming, it's probably going to sound a little bit better anyway, you know? So it's cheating. So that's what it looks like. But where it's changed for me, the Ozone, is when I send it to mastering, technically, someone would be like, oh, okay, I did sort of like a pseudo master. I'm going to just bypass that, print the mix, send it off to mastering, you're done, right? It changed for me because the only thing I bypass now is the maximizer, and we've done tests on this with my mastering engineer, Ricardo. What we did was I would send him two versions, one with the Ozone minus the maximizer, and one with and without. And we always choose the one with Ozone. So it's just become a habit for me to add the Ozone at the end of my mixes. It's almost like, you know, a little bit of sprinkle on the top of the mix. But it's become a very important part of my workflow. And I mean, like I said, I've been using it for so many years, but this AI, and I don't think AI is going to take over. Like, I don't think engineers should be worried that robots are going to mix. Like, I know we're not going to talk about, you know, robotic mastering in this room today, but, you know, I mean, it's great for one thing, but, you know, I believe that mixing and mastering is such an artistic thing. It's really important that I still like the human ear, but it definitely adds something that all of a sudden the AI gives me a different perspective. And it's like, oh man, I've never really used dynamic EQ, but it actually does something really cool to my low end, and it actually tames it a little bit better. So that's why I use, you know, that's what it's really done for me. So I use it to my advantage as part of like, almost like just another tool. And most of the time it works. And sometimes usually when you do the AI, it always gives you an equalizer and it gives you the dynamic EQ. I added the exciter after the fact. And the exciter again is on, and I'll bypass this so you guys can hear. And I'll do it from the drop so you can get the excitement of the exciter. So this is without exciter.
So much
I'll put the maximizer.
Music to my, music to my ears. When we
And you can actually solo each band, so let's go to the sides.
to my,
That's what I'm hearing up there. I want to hear the top of that snare. Just enhance that a little bit. Oops, no one saw that. And then the mid. What did I do on the mid? Nothing. There's nothing on the mid. Just enhance the sides. But you can hear, like, if I wanted to do something now, this is how I would approach it.
music to my, music to my ears.
I would change it.
When we love and we touch and we kissing and I want you right here. Music to my, music to my,
I don't know, that sounds pretty good on stage, but I don't know how well it's tuned up here. So, but that's pretty much the way that I approach it. But it really has changed my workflow. And again, it's not doing the work for me. I'm still doing the work. It's just another level. And as plugins get better, you're going to start seeing a lot more things like this where they're getting creative. I mean, Isotope, you know, there's the plugins that I use on this screen. You'll always see the same things on my sessions. Every plugin company that I use, there's something unique about it that I love. My plugin list is not that crazy. Like, I'm pretty much a creature of habit. The one thing I do try is I definitely try to push myself to try new things. Like, I mean, recently, like I did on a record, I did parallel processing on. It was just on the entire instrumental, almost like I was watching a video with Andrew Sheps where he does this, like, uses the back bus or whatever, and I was like, oh, that sounds cool. I'm not a big fan of the 1176 for parallel, instrumental processing, but I tried something different, like the distressor, and just to, like, enhance that, I use, like, the K stereo from UAD, and I just enhanced, like, the ambience and all this other stuff across the whole mix, and I just snuck that in, and all of a sudden it opened up this the parallel compression. But these are the things that, like, I literally, like, sometimes I, like, daydream about this stuff, like, it's crazy, like, or I'll have a dream about it. It's really weird, where I, like, wake up and I can try something new, and that's the beauty that I like of working in the box, because I could literally just open up my laptop and I can keep working and, you know, try new things and go away on vacation and keep working, which it's not always, you know, family comes down on you for that one sometimes. Are we done? Thank you.
You guys have been so amazing. This is great. But there's good news that the party is not over yet. Ariel, I want to thank you and Isotope one more time for this great presentation.
Listen when you talk back. Listen when you talk back. Look at how